morning, everybody. Good to see you. Beautiful morning. Oh gosh, such a beautiful morning. Okay, well, June is Freedom Month, and that is, I think we've all done that. That beautiful feeling of setting out on an adventure for the day on the water. So, what is the next slide? Okay, we need someone to light the chalice. Hey, how about Colin? So, there you go. Colin is a long time I don't know about member, but certainly familiar with us.
Very
familiar to us. We who watched him grow up.
I think I could find a very useful signature in the
I'd like to see that.
Thank you.
I remember.
All right. Let this purest of flames kindle in each of our hearts, a pledge to justice, a commitment to freedom, and a reverent awe for the crystalline glories that sparkle along our footpath. Well, we've all seen that too. Sometimes the ground is just shining. Okay, time to greet one another. Bob goes over and hammers on the bell, but we don't need to do that. Yeah. Thank you. We're going on a trip down memory lane with Colin here, and then I was just thinking about that bell. I think it was in honor of Josie.
Bill Patrick.
Bill and Josie Patrick. And I kind of think they would get a kick out of it being used also to bring us down after greeting each other. Okay. Joys and concerns. I'm going to start out with a joy. Yesterday we had our grandkids, and one of the things I enjoy doing with them, hadn't done it since last year, is checking the bluebird houses and lifting them up to look in and see the nest with the eggs in it, or the little birds. And the way they respond is just so much fun. I lifted Lincoln up at one, and he looked in there at the little hatchlings and he said, 4. So anybody else? That's my joy. A joy and a concern. For the last 3 months, I've been communicating weekly with a teacher in Ukraine, in Kharkiv. We Zoom every Wednesday. It's been a wonderful connection. But if you read the newspapers, Kharkiv got heavily bombed a day ago, and then at 6 o'clock yesterday evening, a park was bombed. She's so resilient. She works through it, but it's so horrifying to me to be living in a situation like that. So I don't know how the Ukrainian people continue to try to stay positive in this terrible situation. I have a joy and a gratitude for one Andy, who delivered some scrumptious food to my house and helped my grandson eat more than bananas and milk.
And maybe extra for me, so I got to do it too. My joy is Friday night we had a Gaelic music concert here, singers, and I was worried would people come out to see this old time Gaelic music. So I said, "Dan, you better get over here and fill up the chairs." Well, I didn't need to because there were over 50 people. We put away some of the chairs, but you should see these auditorium with all the people listening to a concert, and that's the joy. We need to do more of that in the coming year. Thanks to Catherine Grant for arranging all of
My name is Juliet, and this is a little joy and concern. We have a good old friend visiting with us right now, and she's here partly because she lost her husband to brain cancer, and she asked us to think of her and think of him. His name is Bernard. Just lost him 2 months ago. So this is for Bernard. I have a joy. Thursday evening at Glen Park Open Air Pavilion, we had a community gathering, deep listening session, where people in the community were able to come forward and express their concerns and ambition for their local communities, bringing up a wide variety of issues. And so myself and other volunteers are going to be following up with them to help empower them to create the community they want to see.
I have a joy to share. Been back in the area for the last 2 weeks now. Today, been staying on parents' farm, which is very lovely, and particularly the last week, I should say. First time back, Grayson's growing up here like 15 years for this period of time. It's been very lovely to see some familiar faces, community, and be able to come to that Grayson listening session on Thursday, concert on Friday, and I'll be here today. And just get to see community and really lovely people.
So I have both a joy and a concern. Obviously, I have concern for all the people in Los Angeles right now who are squaring off against ICE, potentially the National Guard. joy in that. Are standing up, depending on whether it's really loud. And then along with that, I also have both joy and concern for the protest happening next Saturday. There's one in Prescott and one in River Falls. But again, we are all together, standing up together to voice those joys and concerns.
For me, it's a joy and a concern. Over the last 4 years, I've watched my husband's health have all sorts of problems and deteriorate, and they think they finally figured out after 4 years what's wrong with him, and he will be undergoing a procedure on Friday to hopefully correct it. So.
No, we are all hoping for the best. And then as far as the No Kings, Hudson and River Falls are, the individual groups are doing theirs together at Lakefront Park in Hudson, 11 to 3. So anybody interested in that, hope we see you there. Okay, all right. Now we get to listen to our speaker, who is someone, I don't know how I met you, Omar. Linda, yes, I don't know, some crazy lucky thing. I'm a baker, so wheat has always been my interest. And then it's not interesting, I guess, to tell people all this whole thing, but we are really lucky to have Omar Warner here today. He has been working with the University of Minnesota on developing Kernza, which is a perennial wheat that you will be learning about from him. And his response to Russia invading Ukraine was to go to Ukraine and help the Ukrainian farmers. So we'll hear what he has to say. Thank you, Omar.
Thank you, Maureen, for inviting me to speak today, and to all of you. It's really a pleasure to be here. I haven't physically gone to Ukraine the past 3 years, but I have been working actually the last 25 years supporting Ukrainians in a variety of capacities. Yes?
You might need to get closer to the mic.
How's that?
Yeah, or you could just pick it up with your hand.
I like to use my hands.
Okay, all right.
But thank you for bringing that up. Sometimes I'm too soft-spoken, and sometimes I'm way too loud. So I want to introduce you to the Rusev family, who I've known for 25 years, and sort of tell a story about the work we've been doing in Ukraine. I will mention the war, but I really want to take a side of hope and look forward to the recovery of Ukraine post-war. And that's really what got us, the Rusevs and I, involved in the work I'm going to describe to you. So on the left is Ivan Rusev, the patriarch of the family, who I first worked with about 25 years ago on a program to help identify and protect the remaining natural prairies in southern Ukraine. Southern Ukraine looks a lot like Iowa and southern Minnesota and South Dakota, extensive prairies, 99% of which have been converted to agriculture. Sort of continuing from right to left, if I have it right, is his wife Tamara. She makes the best borscht I've ever had. And then their son Roman in the back, who I will talk a great deal about. He's been my primary colleague in the work that I'll describe. And his wife, Yulia youngest, Danielle, who she's holding, he's 3 years old in this picture. He was barely 3 months old when the war started, so he's only known war his whole life. Next slide, please. A little bit about the geography of Ukraine for those who are not familiar with Ukraine. By the way, you can see Kharkiv up in the northwest corner, or northeast corner rather, that one of the speakers mentioned just a few minutes ago. But I wanted to point out that Kyiv is about the latitude of Winnipeg. So Ukraine is farther north than we often imagine. It's also really a big country. Excluding Russia, it's the largest country in Europe. The Rusevs live on the Black Sea coast in Odesa, which I marked with a yellow star. And Ivan works in the National Park, Tuzla Lagoons National Park, which is shown with a little red arrow. And then I marked Bulgaria down on the bottom with a green star, which I'll describe to you in a minute. We want to go on to the next slide, please. I had already been talking with Ivan and Roman about how do we get a sustainable agriculture program going in Ukraine. And then the war started, and it all kind of stopped. We focused on humanitarian topics. About 10 days into the war, we learned that Roman's wife and 3 children were trapped in these horrendous lines of refugees trying to get out of Ukraine. They got into Moldova, were trying to cross into Romania, then all 4 of them got sick, probably with COVID, and you can just see the desperation in this picture. And we immediately stepped up, got a GoFundMe campaign going. In fact, some members of this congregation contributed to that. And we began to send them money. Next, please. And they made it to Bulgaria, where they recovered. We continued to send them funds to help supplement the allowance that they got from the European Union, which was really barely enough to survive. So they would send us pictures back of all of the meat and produce and dairy that they were able to purchase with our stuff, a car seat for the baby, and other things that we helped them with. They lived in Bulgaria for 3 months. And then they traveled back to Ukraine, and this is the day that they were reunited with their father. You can see the change in their demeanor. They're back home. The Russians had been pushed back across the Dnipro River, and so there was no immediate threat to Odesa anymore. And there was a really considerable hope in the Ukrainian population at that point. We did continue to support them. They were still struggling, losing power. They managed to buy a generator. They're very generous people. They hooked up they live in an apartment building. They hooked up some of their neighbors to it. They set up a charging station on the little area in front of their door so the neighbors could come and charge their phones and other equipment. They set up Wi-Fi that could be used by anyone who could reach it. Roman, by the way, stayed back in Ukraine, although he could leave, but he actually helped many of the refugees get from places like Kharkiv to move out of the country. So he would actually help move them out to the border at least. So they were all sort of part of that big exodus in various ways. Next. Once they had settled down, this idea of, can we actually get a sustainable agriculture program going here in Ukraine, and what would that look like? So this map, that sort of turquoise swath across the bottom is their steppe or prairie. The lighter colored green is a patchwork of forested prairie, and the far north is kind of like parts of Canada or northern Minnesota, or way northern Wisconsin. Large forests, bogs, swamps, sort of very, not very friendly to agriculture. But the bottom 2/3 are very good for agriculture. In fact, some of the best agricultural lands in the world. Next. More than half of Ukraine is considered prime agricultural land, which is a really amazing number for a large country. And it accounts for some 14% of the workforce, and 40% of all the export is agricultural crops. They compete with the giants in the world like China, the US, Brazil, Russia for production of agricultural crops. They're first in sunflowers, producing half of exported sunflower meal and oil worldwide. And I think it's fourth for corn and fifth for wheat. So a big agricultural enterprise with everything that you need around that to make it work. Next. However, the war severely damaged that agricultural infrastructure, in particular in those richest lands across the South. $11 billion in just infrastructure lost. Barns, silos, tractors, combines, fencing, and 6 million acres have been abandoned. They're not being farmed, they're fallow across that area. Some of them, of course, laid with landmines at this point. Back to the last one, if you will. Back in July of 2022, the World Bank projected it would cost $15 billion to recover the agricultural sector. A few months ago, the update of that report is it will cost $55 billion just to recover agriculture in Ukraine. And but 3 years ago, Roman and I looked at that number, 15 billion, and we said, well, if we could divert part of this into a sort of more sustainable agriculture, we would be improving things in Ukraine. Next. So I approached friends of mine at the Land Institute in Kansas, where they have a particular approach to sustainable agriculture. It looks at the fact that we have taken these native ecosystems that are dominated by perennial plants, and we've converted them to agricultural systems that are dominated by annual plants. Not only are they annual, but they're monoculture. So it's just pure, where we used to have diverse prairies with perennials, we now have corn, soybeans, wheat in single fields. And that leads to a lot of the problems of agriculture. That's not to blame farmers. This has come up through 10,000 years of human selection of what we should do with agriculture. But we can do better. Next. This idea of going from perennials to annuals causes things like the loss of many ecological services, but the most obvious one is the loss of soil. So this 24 billion tons of our prime topsoil is lost every year in agriculture, and we can do something to prevent that. The original ecosystems built that, and now we're depleting it, and there is an end to that, and it's not happy. Next. So if we could return perennials to the agricultural systems, they may not be as diverse as the prairies, but at least it would be healthier for the land, and for us as a society. Next. But we're not talking about just adding some trees or berry bushes or anything. We need to add perennials that give us the same foods, all of those calories that we get out of corn and wheat and soybeans, barley. So we need perennial grain crops. The Land Institute began nearly 50 years ago to develop these perennial grain crops. They started to look at perennial wheat, and they're still working on that with some progress. Perennial rice has become a huge success. Just in the last 2 years, in fact, a couple years ago, it was compared to the James Webb telescope as it competed with that as one of the greatest advancements of humankind, that we now have perennial rice, and it's exponentially growing in South Asia and Africa. They're converting from annual rice to perennial rice. Plant it once, harvest it year after year without having to go back and replant those little seedlings every year. The last one on the list, Kernza, is the one I'll talk about mostly. Here's Kernza rolled oats. I just rolled Kernza, I should say, but it's like oatmeal. I just delivered to Maureen a bag of Kernza flour. And I want to point out the root system of Kernza. On the right-hand side of the slide is that long picture, the little tiny plant of wheat and the gigantic root system of Kernza. That sort of says it all about adding to soil, protecting soil, capturing the nutrients that are added in agricultural systems, and many other benefits, including improved climate change results. Next, please. So what is Kernza? Actually, the plant is called intermediate wheatgrass, and it's been grown in the U.S. for the last 100 years as a forage crop, mostly out west. So it probably used to be planted even in Wisconsin as a forage crop in pastures. But it has a very tasty seed. It's small. Maureen saw the early varieties of this in about 2012, I think, 2013 when we first met. But it's had enormous success in selecting better and better varieties of Kernza. So it now gives a grain crop in July, and then you can either, in September, October, you can either graze it or harvest a very high quality forage crop. So it's not like wheat. Wheat, you harvest the wheat and you get straw that might be worth harvesting as bedding, but it has no nutrient values. Kernza gives you 2 very valuable crops. Plus, it has these ecological services because of that gigantic root and the fact that you have a continuous living cover on top of the soil. If you look at our cornfields right today, they're mostly black dirt. Second week of June, and the corn plants are about this big, and it's still mostly black dirt, very vulnerable. Kernza, at this point, at this time right now, is a lush, it looks like a pasture, except it's about to bolt and put up a grain crop. Next. And it is really a nutritious and delicious food. That was one of the reasons that the Land Institute got involved with this, and that I began working on it about 15 years ago. And I was working at the University of Minnesota at the time. And beer, we're in Wisconsin after all, so beer is very popular made with Kernza, and you can buy Kernza beer in a number of places, especially up in the cities. That Kernza whiskey is from Tattersall, our own local distillery here. And the climate smart Kernza cereal is made by General Mills. And you can buy that up at Whole Foods. Next. So the Land Institute, I thought it was kind of wild. I wrote them about a half a page idea that we should start this program in Ukraine. And I did know that the fact that they had just earlier that year been awarded this World Food Prize of $1 million, and they were trying to figure out what to do with that. And they said, well, sure, let's dive in and start a program in Ukraine in the middle of a war. I was as surprised as anyone that they said that, but it was their choice. Next slide, please. So Roman and I got together, and it took us about 6 months even to identify the right people to work with in Ukraine. The Zoom call image up there, Roman's on the bottom left, I'm on the bottom right, and the other half dozen or so of the scientists are people that we got in touch with, working with them over several months. They eventually sent us a proposal for their research design that you can see on the bottom left. We sent them kernels of seed, which we sent them a couple hundred pounds of seed. It took about 36 hours for it to get to Germany and another 6 weeks to get from there into Ukraine. I always imagined the bags of seed got tucked under, a Sherman tank as it got trucked into Ukraine somewhere, because that was the priority at the time. It was very hard to get anything delivered to Ukraine other than military supplies. And they divided it up into those 5 packages, next, and sent it out to these institutions in Ukraine, all of whom started this coordinated research program. And Roman and I supported and helped to organize this work. The photograph on the bottom is of a field day, bringing in industry people, farmers, researchers, to look at all the latest crops. You can't see kerns in that picture, but it was part of the field day. And I want to point out that that was down in Mykolaiv, which had at the very beginning of the war, when Yulia and the children first escaped. Mykolaiv it may have been occupied, it was nearly occupied at the start of the war before the Ukrainians pushed the Russians back. So they're right now at the war front, and yet that was last July. They're holding these field days and doing this research in the middle of a war, and really truly under threat of war at every minute. Next. So they planted these fields in 2023, harvested their first data from these plots in 2024, had that grain. The picture on the far right is about a week ago. They had students out in one of these kerns of fields, digging a soil pit to show them those kerns of roots and the value it has for a future of agriculture in Europe. So here's students, and we're talking about the future of agriculture in Ukraine. Next. It wasn't all rosy. That's enough about kerns. Other things were going on this whole time. I said that Rusevs live in Odesa. They live in an apartment, a third-floor apartment, about a kilometer, 1,000 meters from the port of Odesa, which is a major target of the Russians. With the advent of drones and these things constantly coming in, they are escaping to the bomb shelter almost every night. So they bundle up the baby and they rush down to the bomb shelter and they sleep in these little beds. The 2 older boys get maybe 2 hours of sleep before they get up and go to school. yet life continues, and they still find times to find something joyous. Yulia taking a walk in the woods. She has a bachelor's degree in science, in fact, in agronomy. Now she's doing mostly, as a housekeeper and raising the children and educating them. Because a lot of the education is now done at home. The photograph in the middle is the two grandmas with the three boys standing in front of the oldest opera house in Ukraine, the Odesa Opera House. And in the background, you can see sandbags piled up around the opera house. That picture was actually taken early on when they still were expecting the Russians to come into Odesa, and that they would be fighting them off, block by block. Next. But that's not all the grandmas do. Here's Tamara in her own version of greening of Ukraine. On the one side, she's making winter camouflage, and in the other picture, she's making summer camouflage for the military. And lastly, back to Ivan. Ivan, through all of this, has continued to work in the national park system. He is one of the most prominent conservation scientists in all of Ukraine. You can find him on YouTube, and even there are short films that have been shown in Europe and other film festivals about his work. Early on, it was the protection of that national park. In the last few years, it's been about dolphins, the Black Sea dolphin. More than 50,000 of them have been killed during the war as a direct result of the war in the Black Sea. And one bright spot is the flamingo colonies that used to reside in what is now occupied, temporarily occupied Ukraine. Get the right words for the Ukrainians. They were so disrupted there that they actually moved in 2003 to the Tuzla National Park lagoons and began breeding for the first time. So a bit of hope for the flamingos of Ukraine. Also, go back to point out that, mind you, that's further north than River Falls is, yet they have flamingos. It's the warming effect of the Black Sea on the southern coast of Ukraine. Lastly, Daniel. He's an inquisitive little kid. He always seems to have a smile. I think of him very often. So, he has questions. And if you have questions too, I'll try to answer them. Back there. Yeah.
How's the market for Kernza?
The market for Kernza is struggling. In part, there's this gap of getting enough produced to sort of to build a market. Early on, when I first was doing this, I worked at the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, and I was fortunate enough to have very liberal grants. And I just purchased the rights to abandoned research fields. And by hook or by crook, or with the help of Maureen's bicycle mill, I started to mill Kernza flour and personally deliver it around to restaurants and deliver the grain to breweries. And I did that for a couple of years. I gave it to General Mills, their first bag. it's, yeah. There are more and more farmers planting it, and you can go to kernza.org and sort of see what the market is and what's going on. It's challenging.
What about
In Ukraine, there's no market at all yet. I mean, there's a total of 85 acres planted in Ukraine. However, we did just, one of the guys who was shown in that Zoom call is the head of the economics department of the National Academy of Agrarian Sciences. And we just helped arrange him to get a stipend to work in Sweden, and he is developing a roadmap to commercialization of kernza in Europe, along with a bunch of Europeans. And they've also just received several $1 million in grants to increase the production and the research, and in particular, how do we get it out to farmers, and how do we sort of bridge this gap of getting the first, few thousand pounds even processed and off to market. Wendy?
Have you talked to future farmers of America here in River Falls?
What?
Have you spoken with future farmers of America in River Falls?
No, I've not. That's an idea. There is a group at the Land Institute that is specifically looking at a lot of outreach. In fact, I brought that up. I was just at meetings in Mexico in March with the sort of all the people in the world who are working on this. And I brought that up directly with them about Future Farmers of America as a place to reach out and sort of build a base for support of Kernza. So, good idea. Yes?
Being perennial, I guess it takes a few years to get to the point of reaching a peak production. I was curious of how long that may take, or if it's immediate, and once it is kind of peak production on a per acre basis, what are the yields like compared to any other folks or places?
That's a couple of really good questions. Kernza is typically planted in the fall. It has to fertilize. It has to go through a very cold winter before it will produce. So it really it's a northern temperate or southern temperate crop. And it'll produce really well the first year and the second year. Yields are less than half of wheat, for example. But it really shouldn't be compared directly to wheat because it also has the forage value and it has those ecological services. That some places are paying farmers. Minnesota in particular has put money into paying farmers to plant Kernza in fields that are near wetlands or waterways to help capture the nutrients before they get into the waterways. And so there are a lot of ways to subsidize the otherwise low yield of Kernza. After about 3 years, the yield tends to decline. We still don't know the science behind why it's declining. And so the recommendation right now is after 4 years, you probably have to renovate the field. You probably have to plow it up and replant Kernza or another crop. But still, you get 4 years of it in the ground, and it produces the whole time. That root that you saw, it produces a root like that in the first year, and it really produces a good crop in the first and second year in particular. It is very perennial. We have Kernza fields that are still out there. I think they're 16 or 17 years old now, and they still produce. It's too low to be viable at that point. I will say that, I've given whole presentations on just the genetics and breeding of this. None of it's GMO, but it's accelerated by knowing what the genomic map looks like. We can take a little clip of a leaf off of a seedling and run it through and determine what properties it's best for and whether that is one that we want to sort of push forward in the breeding cycle. We don't have to wait 3 years to see what it looks like. should match wheat production in about 15 years. That's how, it's really spectacular how fast it's growing. The seed is getting larger and larger. We've solved issues like shattering. It used to be it's a wild plant, so you try to go out and harvest it, and all the seed would fall off into the field. It now all holds onto the head. We completely solved that with breeding in just a few years. So you're asking questions of a farmer. That's good. Yes.
Can you use similar equipment?
You can use exactly the same equipment.
The loaf of bread that you showed said 50% curds and 50% wheat. Is it, can you make a loaf of bread out of curds, and what does it taste like?
You can make a loaf of bread out of curds. It would taste all right, but it would have the consistency approximately of a brick for building a building. Curds does have gluten. It has a lot of gluten, but gluten comes in many varieties, and not all glutens have that elastic thing. You know, when you make bread, a lot of you have made bread, it becomes very elastic. You start to fold it, and it holds this shape. Kernels of flour by itself won't do that. So you really can't, you have to have 50% wheat to make bread, and then it makes excellent bread. Kernels, though, you can make excellent pancakes, muffins, cookies, crackers, a lot of things. There are a whole lot of kernels recipes out there. Yes?
You mentioned that perennial rice is a big success program. Are there any perennial rice products available for sale in the United States?
Not that I'm aware of. You have a question? Any more questions? Yeah.
It comes from a perennial prairie with multi crops. Is it intercrop?
Yeah, some of the pictures I showed actually showed as an intercrop with legume. So it's most often grown as just kernza, but we have a lot of experiments going on now for 10 years and more with different alternate, a few rows of kernza and a row of alfalfa or bird's foot trefoil or other forage crops that then add nitrogen to the soil. You do have to add nitrogen to kernza just as you would with any crop, because you harvest the grain out, you're removing a lot of nutrients. So you do have to fertilize kernza. I eliminated all the slides that show the water quality things. There's a big deal about corn. A lot of the fertilizer in corn goes straight through the soil into the groundwater. Kernza, almost zero fertilizer is lost. All of it is captured by the plant. So it's very efficient. I don't know if I answered your question or not. Yeah. Prescott?
I have the same question.
No? Okay, I get it. All right, so, whoops, flags. I had some extras. I put them in there in the kitchen. I encourage you to take one home. I don't want to bring it back with me. I have more. And if somebody would like the rolled kernza to try an experiment in your kitchen, please take that as well. I'll put that back in the kitchen. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Okay, so does anyone know what third place means? Yeah,
At home, not work.
At home, not work. Everybody knows your name. Doesn't have to be the bar. And we're looking for UU to be a third place for people. board meeting, we will have that. The UUA General Assembly in Baltimore, I will not be going there, but it is online. And Petrona, Melgarejo, is that how you said it? Melgarejo will be speaking on June 22nd. Give us a glimpse into what it's like to be an immigrant in our community, which I think would be a very great insight. I'm looking forward to that. Okay. And we have a basket for contributions if you wish to leave some on your way out, usually on a chair in the back. And we've got some treats in the kitchen, as I understand. And I know there are flags up there. So be sure to get one. And we can all gather around in a big circle and say our closing words.
We got 2 minutes.